Welcome to Get Into the Act. I'm your host, John Berg, with the Sacramento County Office of Education. Get Into the Act is a series of video presentations brought to you by the California Department of Education's Middle and High School Improvement Office. Renowned educators who are passionate about student learning and achievement will share research-based strategies to help middle grades teachers ensure success and close the achievement gap for their students. Each presentation focuses on one or more of the 12 Taking Center Stage Act 2 recommendations. Dr. Kate Kinsella is currently an adjunct faculty member in secondary education at San Francisco State University and provides consultancy nationally to school districts regarding instruction of adolescent English learners. As a teacher-educator, she has maintained active involvement in 4 through 12 classrooms by regularly coaching and co-teaching while also teaching academic literacy skills to high school English learners in San Francisco State University's Step to College program. Dr. Kinsella is co-author of Scholastic's 2006 Read 180 Literacy Intervention Program and is the 2008 author of the companion 4 through 12 ELD curricula to Read 180, the L Book. She is also the author of Pearson's Reading in the Content Areas, Strategies for Reading Success. A former Fulbright lecturer in teaching ESL, Dr. Kinsella has received numerous awards, including the Marcus Foster Memorial Reading Award and in 2005, the California Department of Education's Award of Excellence for her contributions to improving the education of immigrant youth. This is the second session of a 4-part series of videos by Dr. Kate Kinsella. In this video segment, Dr. Kinsella will be focusing on how to teach explicit vocabulary.
Hello, welcome to Get Into the Act. I'm Kate Kinsella, and this is the second in a 4-part series designed to help you more fully implement some of the most critical recommendations in Taking Center Stage Act 2. Today, we're going to explore a critical topic: explicit and engaged vocabulary instruction in middle grades classrooms, and in fact, across the middle school curricula. In this session, we're going to be examining 3 critical recommendation areas in the Taking Center Stage Act 2 recommendations. And the first you'll find in Chapter 1, focusing on rigor. We're going to see how critical it is for us to have instruction, assessment, and intervention techniques to support students in accessing rigorous curricula. And part of that is explicit, intentional, and informed vocabulary instruction. We're going to see how critical it is to have relevance. And Chapter 4 addresses in detail the engaging and important role of relevance for middle school youths. So I hope it becomes vividly apparent to you as you see me modeling, as I cover key points, and as we examine video footage in middle grades classrooms, how preparing rigorous vocabulary instruction will support them in having full access to critical content standards, and how important it's going to be to make sure that they go away with relevant examples that enable them to develop a little vocabulary Velcro. So let's look at our objectives. My first is that this session enables you as colleagues to reflect on your current teaching practices to engage all learners in explicit vocabulary instruction. Every subject area, from physical education to science, has critical terminology that can prevent students from accessing your curricula. So we're going to be looking at a research-informed instructional approach that makes sense across the subject areas to bolster students' expressive word knowledge. I'm going to be detailing what I mean by expressive word knowledge, but in a nutshell, it means their ability to use a word confidently and competently. I hope at the end of this process that you understand the key steps in explicitly teaching a word, and that you understand the absolutely pivotal role of vocabulary, both in literacy and learning across the middle grades curricula. Let's first look at the axiomatic role of vocabulary knowledge in literacy and learning in secondary curricula. There cannot be a more quantum leap in terms of curricular demands than from elementary schooling to the middle grades. And often in my work in 6th grade classrooms, I find students think they've landed in the hands of Cruella de Vil. when they have a science teacher or language arts teacher who actually expects them to read the science chapter or really read the core novel. And part of what prevents them from really reading that with confidence and confidence is the detailed vocabulary, the comprehensive vocabulary that isn't part of their oral language. So we know that vocabulary knowledge, there is a strong and reciprocal relationship between how much vocabulary a youth knows and how well that youth will do with reading and with learning. And in fact, as a scholar in the area of English learners, vocabulary is the strongest and most reliable predictor of academic achievement for an English learner in upper elementary and secondary school that we have to date. So it is going to be really incumbent upon all of us to tackle vocabulary together with consistent research-informed approaches. Now, let's look at what they are and what they're not. We know scholars agree in the vocabulary arena on 4 key things that must happen in the middle grades for students to really bolster the vocabulary. First, they need to engage in fluent, wide reading with greater emphasis on nonfiction. What do I mean by fluent reading? That means they can read with ease and dexterity, that they're not stumbling and starting, that they're relatively familiar with most of the vocabulary, and that they read widely, not narrowly. That they're actually reading their science curricula, not just doing hands-on science experiments, that they're actually reading their social studies curricula, not just doing activities that enable them to fill in a graphic organizer. They have to read widely to get exposure to many new words. But although reading widely across the subject areas is the main way a youth can really bolster their recognition of many words, it isn't the most reliable way for them to develop a confident command to use words effectively in speaking and writing. We know that for students to be able to use a word effectively in either speaking or writing, they need to have explicit scaffolded instruction, either from a parent or guardian, a teacher, a counselor, or a sibling. But someone needs to take the time to explain to them that word and to give relevant examples. In middle school, because many students come in with real voids in their lexical knowledge, we really need to be spending our time on explicit instruction of high leverage words. And what I mean by high leverage words are words that are portable, words they can take with them across the subject areas and to their other contexts, the social and later professional contexts of their lives. A third aspect of vocabulary development across the middle grades that is critical is actually developing students' word knowledge and study strategies. And what I mean by word knowledge is helping them learn how words work. I've worked with 9th graders, 12th graders that have no concept of what a prefix is or suffix. And if they don't understand what a prefix is, they don't understand what's happening to a word when it changes from the teacher saying, read the article, to pre-read the article, to reread the article, and don't misread or pseudo-read the article because we're going to have a post-reading test. Really having word knowledge and knowing how words works is critical to navigate middle school curricula. But what we know too is that it can't just be meaningful explanations and examples. We need to have carefully orchestrated opportunities for students to use newly taught words. And if they don't use them and have scaffolded practice in the classroom, the likelihood of them using those independently in their own social or academic interactions or writing is pretty negligible. So as a teacher working in mixed ability classrooms, I know it's my responsibility to not only teach very carefully targeted, high priority words, but to make sure they leave my classroom better equipped to use them. So let's get back to the difference between expressive knowledge and our recognition vocabulary. I want to clarify 2 terms that are important in vocabulary development because they have a decided impact on how much instructional time and primacy we devote to teaching a word. First, when we talk about receptive word knowledge or vocabulary, we're referring typically to how many words students recognize, and it is far greater than their expressive vocabulary, the words they can actually use. It includes words we recognize when we hear them or encounter them in reading, but it also includes many words for which we only have partial knowledge. A word may be a multiple meaning word, or a word that we've only partially understood in one context. So students come in with a lot of gaps in their vocabulary knowledge and also wide exposure. But On a daily basis, I need to ramp up their exposure to many words through my own vocabulary usage and to words I expose them to in reading and speaking and other activities. But I also need to make some calculated decisions about what words are critical for them to add to their academic toolkit, words that they need to be able to use effortlessly and reliably in speaking and writing. And these words are part of their expressive word knowledge. Expressive vocabulary, which is often referred to as productive vocabulary, includes words we can use comfortably and capably. And I work with a lot of students who use words confidently but incapably. They're sort of in a lexical limbo. They know them, but no one took the time to show them how you actually use the word accurate in a sentence. So while they may have learned that accurate means the information must be precise, the measurements must be correct, they know that it means that, but then they write independent sentences like, Dr. Kate accurate my paper today. She fixed the verbs. So we're going to be looking at developing their expressive vocabulary means that we tackle helping them understand not only the meaning, but how do I use this word appropriately in syntax and grammar. And for middle school students, more so than in the early elementary grades, expressive vocabulary means have we equipped them to be able to write the word effectively and to use it in a written sentence as well as in their speaking. In this session, I'm going to be focusing on how to develop expressive word knowledge. Before we look at an explicit research-informed routine that would make sense in your middle school, let's look at some common practices that don't reliably foster expressive word knowledge. The first is arriving to class, what I call preparation-free, and asking as you encounter a word at point of encounter in the reading or in your Cornell Notes lecture, asking, oh, by the way, does anybody know what accurate means? Looking furtively out at a group of middle school students who immediately dodge eye contact or stare at the few professional participants in the classroom. You know, that is really unreliable, and to middle school students does convey that you're busted. You arrive to class not really preparing to teach them. And it also imparts to them that this isn't very important if you're relying on them for the information chronically. Another unreliable strategy is constantly asking students to guess from the context what it means. In reading material, most instructional material in middle grades is above their comfort level. It's either at the challenge level or nearly impossible level for many students. The research on context shows that only about 5 to 15% of the time is the context rich enough for students to be able to reliably begin to extract meaning. Now that's with students with average reading skills and oral skills. If you have students who are fragile, vulnerable English users or readers, the odds are almost nil that they're going to guess from a demanding context what a word means. So the first thing I suggest is not even use the word guess in your vocabulary teaching lexicon to say analyze if you're going to go in and tackle. And it should never be a primary or sole strategy. It should be a strategy as part of a repertoire. And it needs to be followed with really confirming in the dictionary that that meaning is accurate. Another unreliable strategy is asking students to look up words that you haven't previously addressed. Looking up words in the dictionary and then often the sort of evil stepsister applying them in original sentences. As someone who works consistently with publishers to try to improve their dictionaries, I know that lexicographers, the individuals who write dictionaries, usually are not concerned about how to explain the word accurate to an underprepared sixth grader. Their concern is conservation of page real estate. And what they're preoccupied with is how precise and how concise can this definition be so it won't take up a lot of room on the page. In the truncated dictionaries middle school youths often have in their backpack, the small desk dictionaries, there are rarely example sentences. The definition for the verb categorize would say to place in categories. It would use another form of the word or supply a synonym like classify, an equally demanding word. So what happens with a youth like my young friend Consuelo that I introduced in the first session, who is an English learner, what often happens is they just put down that dictionary and give up and hope against hope that the teacher will actually explain it the next day. Another unreliable source of developing confident and competent word knowledge and expressive use is giving a bunch of independent activities that aren't preceded by robust instruction. So for example, sort of what I think of as bad substitute teacher activities, giving crossword puzzles, dictionary matching activities, and word sorts when the words weren't previously taught. A crossword puzzle doesn't teach a word. It's essentially just a matching exercise with definitions. And if the student doesn't understand them, that leads them down sort of a dark path. So crossword puzzles are examples, and word sorts are examples of activities, but not instruction. I think in the middle grades, there's often an endemic confusion about vocabulary instruction, and I see often more activities than actual instruction. Let's look at some of the features of instruction. It involves the teacher, and it's planned, not on the fly, and it's directed. It's also very explicit, including clear explanations. Now, how does an explanation differ from a definition? Explanations are in familiar language, drawing on synonyms, and not precise and concise, like the definition for categorize being to place in categories. It also involves guided use, with the teacher modeling how to use it and structuring students' active and competent ability to use it, going from I do it to we do it to now you do it. And if anything, if you do have application tasks that are creative or engaging, like crossword puzzles or any other type of writing task, that at least instruction has preceded them. Now, if we contrast that with what is often an unreliable set of strategies, activities, students are typically doing it on their own. And if they are doing it collaboratively, I'm finding it's often the blind leading the blind, using the dictionary together. That often they're looking at definitions, not explanations, and there's very little guidance or feedback, and asking them to do written sentences before they've even had some mediated opportunities to use it in speaking. So the research base is solid that if we want to develop students' confident, expressive word knowledge, their ability to use it effectively, we've got to have conscientious planning, really analyzing and prioritizing words, and using a consistent and research-informed process, not what I call a chameleon process, where every day what you're doing differs with vocabulary. When you have mixed ability students in your classroom, they need to know exactly what you're going to do when you teach a word, and not subject them to a random array of activities over the course of the semester. So, along with other vocabulary scholars, I maintain that we can facilitate students' learning of critical new words by delivering really rich and targeted instruction with consistent and, I would add, recognizable practices. So students can go into automatic pilot and devote 100% of their intellectual capital to learning and not adjusting to what it is you appear to be doing. So let's take a look at an explicit routine. I'm going to model teaching a word, and also we'll look at a clip. There are 4 critical stages in teaching an important new word, and the first is to get students to read and pronounce the word. We next have to make sure we explain, not define the word. We also need to make sure we really work hard at deepening their understanding and coaching their use. Now, to help you get a flavor for what I mean by this, I'd like you to take a look at your slide. I have a note-taking scaffold for you, a note-taking guide, and you'll notice there are some blanks. As I teach the word, I'm going to be asking you to do a number of things verbally and non-verbally to respond to my teaching. So I'm going to ask you to sit up, dendrites quivering with anticipation, pick up a pen, and get ready to learn an important new word. My goal is to accessorize your lexicon here. Here we go. Our target word today is one of my favorites, and the word is apotheosis. Apotheosis. Let's tap it out and say it slowly in parts first. Me first. Apotheosis. Everyone? Apotheosis. One more time. Apotheosis. Now quickly. Me first. Apotheosis. Everyone? Apotheosis. Now just individuals. Apotheosis. 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 What's our smart word? Apotheosis. You've got it. Now that you can say it, I'd like you to write it on this line. Write it in so we all have a sense of what that word looks like. Please copy it. Now that you've written it, let's check out the meaning. In the second column, I'd like you to fill in the words I've left out as I clarify exactly what apotheosis means. First of all, I want to point out apotheosis is a thing. It's a noun. And let's look at what this thing is. When you talk about something that is the apotheosis, it is the best and most perfect example of something. So, if you have friends in town and they say, oh, we're dying for an excellent pizza. We've been on a road trip, we've been camping a lot, and we're dying to have an excellent pizza. Where would you say is the best pizza in town? And after you argue amongst family members, you might say, well, you know, we all concur that the best and most perfect example of a pizza in this town is Gino's because of the fresh ingredients that they use, the crispy crust, the fact that it's cooked on an open wood fire. We all agree that Gino's is not just the best, it's the, what everyone? Apotheosis. And as you listen to that theos, I want to share with you that the origin of this word comes from Greek, theos meaning the height. So if you say something is the apotheosis, it means the top. It's the highest you can go. Let's look at a couple more examples. The first time I encountered the word apotheosis was in a newspaper review of new fall TV shows. And I don't usually learn a lot of new vocabulary from things like the TV Guide, but this was a newspaper article reviewing the fall lineup of TV shows. And the statement was, once again in the fall lineup, we have a veritable glut of forensic TV shows, ranging from old familiar faces like CSI Miami and Crossing Jordan to new shows like Bones. And they said, because there are so many, we thought we'd interview some key forensic specialists in Los Angeles to ask the real doctors, what do you view as the best show? And they said that after interviewing the forensic doctors, they concurred that out of all the forensic shows on television, the original CSI Las Vegas was the apotheosis. Why? Because of the wide array of equipment that they used on the show, the authenticity with which they used the equipment, and in particular because of the lead scientist, Gil Grisham, who to them seemed like a real nerdy, serious scientist rather than a sexy Hollywood actor. So because of all these characteristics, they felt that show was the best and the what? The apotheosis. Now, in my work, I get to travel and see many places in the United States, and I'm very blessed in that regard. And when I stay in a place for a while, I like to see interesting and quirky locations, but I also love to go out on walks and see scenic locations. And when people come to my hometown, San Francisco, I always tell people that you have to see many beautiful sights, but amongst all the scenic locations in San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge is the apotheosis. I'd like you all to think right now, in the town where you live or the city where you live, what is one place that you consider a scenic location? And in just a moment, you're going to share with your partner. All right, I'm going to stop right here. But as you can see, I took a great deal of time to make sure you could read that word, pronounce that word, write that word. I gave you several portals to comprehension, not one drive-by definition. I gave several examples, and my goal being that every learner would have some example that would click. One sort of type of vocabulary Velcro. So the next time that youths encounter the word apotheosis, they can have that trigger word that will come back to them. And I was carefully orchestrating in the task on scenic locations your use of the word, and with students, I follow up with a homework writing task. And if you see with this task, out of the U.S. media sources for world news, blank is the blank because what we often do is short circuit the process by saying the word, giving them the definition, and then telling them, maybe if they're lucky, giving them one example, then telling them to write an original sentence. So students have at best a tenuous grasp on the meaning, and now they're supposed to put it in an original sentence. Because I work with struggling readers sitting side by side with very proficient readers with an inflated sense, I might add, of their lexical prowess, I want to make sure that I've given them one carefully sculpted opportunity to use the word correctly before I unleash them to use the word in an original sentence. Now, we're going to take a look at a video clip, and in this clip you're going to see me actually teaching a group of 6th grade students with English learners and striving readers in the classroom in a very challenging unit on child labor. So the word we'll be tackling is one of the key concepts, the central terms international, since the focus is on child labor practices around the world. And as you watch this, I want you to watch how I'm engaging the students both non-verbally and verbally, as I just did with you in this instructional process. The first thing we're going to look at is my explicit instruction, and then we're going to watch me carefully calibrating their use of that word with structured response frames. Here we go. We're going to look at another word that Ms. Mendoza introduced in your R book builder, and you looked at the word international, which is a describing word, an adjective. We're going to explore that meaning in a little more depth and look at the adverb form, this kind of word that describes or modifies a verb and tells us more about the action. So first, let's revisit the word international. Everyone? International. One more time. International. And could my cognate helper, Yami? Yami, could you remind us of what the Spanish cognate is?
Internacional.
Beautiful. One more time.
Internacional.
Beautiful. So our Spanish cognate, internacional, you can hear the similarity because both of these words have a Latin origin and they have the same meaning. And I'll remind you that international means that it's relating or something to do with two or more countries. Please write in the word countries. So, if we're studying about a serious problem like global warming, and it's a problem in Mexico, and a problem in the United States, and a problem in Canada, we could say that's an international problem. And in this workshop, if we look at our first example here, we've learned that child labor is an international problem. It's not just a problem in one country, it's a problem in several countries. And we saw it was a problem in the US, in Pakistan, and in many other countries. So it's a problem that is what, everyone? International. Beautiful. Now that I've had the opportunity to engage you in the process of learning Word with me and having you view a 6th grade classroom with me in action with younger learners, I'd like to call out some of the things that I did very explicitly to help students comprehend and have access to that word before I orchestrated their use of the word. And the first step in this process is to get them to really read and pronounce the word. Often I'm observing in middle grades classrooms and the teacher's explaining the word and students' eyes are following the teacher rather than actually looking at the word. Students must look at the word as they're learning a word. Otherwise, they can't get an auditory and visual imprint of that word. So direct students' attention to the written word, make sure they're looking at it, and I have no qualms about saying point to the word so I know that all 30 students in my class are seeing the word as I say it, so they have a strong verbal and auditory imprint, and to support their decoding of that word. I want to guide them in pronouncing the word after I've pronounced it a few times. And the needier my students or the more underprepared with language, I'm going to make sure I've pronounced it a few times, knowing that the last proficiency to develop for academic or professional purposes in a second language or dialect is listening. So I may be saying lexicon, but they're hearing ex-con. So I want to make sure that I'm pronouncing that word very clearly and several times as they look at it. I want to also guide them in pronouncing it. And if my students are more proficient, I might just have them say it a couple times and engage them in saying it a few more times during the process. But with students who are English learners or have language issues, I want to make sure they've pronounced it a few times with me before we start getting into meaning. You'll also notice that I broke that longer polysyllabic word, apotheosis, into syllables, because that is very difficult for struggling readers to tackle a long word like that that is unlike anything they've ever said in oral language. So breaking it into parts minimally so they can see the syllables on the board or your visual, and then to have them either tap it out or even hum it or tap it on the table or clap their hands so they're really getting that tactile kinesthetic interaction. After you're sure that students can pronounce the word, we want to make sure we explain. And I'll remind you that explain means familiar language complemented with examples. And my experience is that often teachers go off on bird walks and spend so much time explaining the word that they've lost the students. The explanation should be clear, accessible, and efficient. And I would say the time where you should spend more time would be with your examples. As we move to the next stage, deepening understanding, it's helpful if you can provide a quick visual representation. But I'm the first to admit I am so under-equipped in the visual art department. For me to draw out a quick sketch would take a Herculean, if not Sisyphean, intervention. But Often, those of you teaching history or science or math have a visual right there you can point to. But when I'm teaching abstract concepts like international, there isn't something really convenient to point to that helps them access that. So what I can provide instead are some meaningful showing examples and sentences that help that word attach. What's important is not a literal visual in front of them, but that they have a mental model going on in their mind, something that they can remember. And a vibrant showing example that you provide connected to their lives and interests, something familiar, is going to create that lexical Velcro. Or the word I use with kids is, I'm working hard so you have a little vocabulary Velcro. We're going to see right now my work at getting students to be able to actually use this word, now that I've explained it, to get them to use this word in a meaningful sentence. And again, because there are students here with a range of language proficiency and a range of language confidence, I'm carefully scaffolding with a sentence frame and a word bank, notice, to enable them with confidence and competence to use this word with their partner and subsequently in the unified class discussion. Let's take a look of me back in action with the same 6th grade class. Let's look at one other example of international together. Getting away from the serious topic of child labor, let's look at a fun topic. There are many international stars, music stars, film stars, TV stars, sports athletes, athletic stars, and many of them are international. That people appreciate them in many countries. So I could say, for example, that one international basketball star is Yao Ming. Does anybody know who Yao Ming is? Yao Ming, where's he from? He's from China, you're right. And he's a fabulous basketball player, and he is a star in the United States. When
he's deaf.
And is he deaf?
Yeah, because he has this, he pays this guy to, talk.
No,
He's Chinese.
He's not deaf, but he has a translator. He can hear, but he has a translator to help him. His English has improved a lot. But he's an international star. He's loved in China, in Europe, the United States. So because he plays basketball in many countries, and he has fans in many countries, we could say he's not just a national star in China. He's what kind of star? International. International. I'd like you to think of another star. Maybe a movie star, someone who's in movies in the US and in Mexico or somewhere else. Or maybe a music star, someone who can sell out a concert here, but also in Mexico or other countries. Think carefully. Maybe it's a baseball or basketball star. Let's begin with our number ones. Number ones, share your example of an international star with your partner.
One international TV star is Hannah Montana.
One international movie star is Eddie Murphy.
One international soccer player star is Ronaldo.
One international movie star is Governor Schwarzenegger.
I don't know. One international music star is Carlos Santana.
I hope you noticed how confidently and efficiently every student in that class turned to a partner and used the response frame to share a meaningful example with their partner. And because I knew I had some fragile and apprehensive students in the class, as well as some professional participants who were willing to respond for everyone and at any and every occasion, I wanted every student to have time to collect his or her thoughts and to give them a response frame that also included a word bank, and calling out for them different examples of international stars they might think of. So they had a variety of concepts they might explore rather than providing them with just one idea, and also guiding them in the syntax and grammar for using that correctly in a sentence. And every student came up with an example, including even our reference to Governor Schwarzenegger as an international movie star. So I structured the brief oral task, and later in the lesson gave them a follow-up homework assignment with the 3 new words we'd learned that day, that we'd introduced that day. Each of those had a structured writing task, much as the one I assigned to you with the word apotheosis, that didn't just say put it in an original sentence, but really framed for them when to use it and gave them the opportunity to provide the content. So as a closing comments, I hope that it is clear through my my points that I've made, as well as the video footage, that equipping middle grade students with the confidence and the competence to use words in their speaking and writing across the curricula and in their everyday lives has to be instruction that is intentional, that is structured and consistent, that is recognizable, not a chameleon pedagogy, and that's very scaffolded, that always goes from the teacher modeling to getting the class to work together to independent practice, and that it's multimodal. Students are actively involved kinesthetically, auditorially, verbally. They're really involved with every sensory level, and it's personalized so that they leave that lesson with a mental model, something to help them immediately access that word. So even if they overhear the word apotheosis on the news, they may not immediately recollect the definition, but they will recollect the example that best stuck with them. In my next session, I'm going to be continuing with the topic of structured, accountable academic discussion. And as you saw me do with this vocabulary instruction, structuring their oral language, you're going to see structured oral language across a range of activities. I hope you've got some practical strategies, and as colleagues, you get together right away to problematize together. How can we as colleagues across the curricula use some consistent practices to make sure that students are using vocabulary, not just us in the classroom? Thank you very much for your time.
You've just seen Dr. Kate Kinsella discuss how to teach explicit vocabulary. To find more information and additional resources on this and related topics, go to pubs.cde.ca.gov/TCS2.